Nerds, I am here with Erica Smith, who is running for the U.S. Senate, and she actually came really close last time. Got over 400,000 votes in the Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate. So she might be one of the best chances to get a pro UBI person into DC. So we're going to learn more about Erica and talk about what's going on in the world in general and her campaign. But first, let's warm it up.
Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up. Yo, there's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's and Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up. Yo, there's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's and Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Go ahead, Erica. Well, we're waiting for your hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds. This caught me off guard. I've been called a nerd my entire academic life. I went to the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics for high school. Our mascot were unicorns, and we were always called nerds. I'm happy to be here. Hello, nerds.
Welcome, fellow nerd. Yeah, I saw you worked at Boeing as an engineer, so yes. Definitely. I'm guessing you encountered some fun mathematical problems and science problems over the years, and
absolutely
somehow you decided to go for public service. Tell me a little bit about that journey. Like, how did you go from great job, I'm sure, at Boeing, and a degree in engineering and a divinity degree to now running for office?
That's a great question. And when I worked for Boeing, I worked on the defense and space side. I supported Space Station as one of the programs that I supported. But I tell everybody I didn't get my first alien encounter until I served in the North Carolina Senate. Some of the Republicans who insist on fighting against working people. But at any rate, my master's is in religious studies from Howard University. I went on a mission trip to Uganda after I earned my master's degree. And what I learned on that mission trip to Uganda is that we can send technology to Jupiter and back, and but yet we can't to developing countries beyond our borders, or even the rural parts of the state within our borders. I went through a family transition. I relocated back to North Carolina to help my mom take care of my dad, who had early onset of Alzheimer's and dementia. And I literally, Tom, I went from sending people into orbit to waking up in a home where I could not load my emails. I lived on a dirt path and did not have opportunities that I know are available. And it's unfortunate that our lack of broadband and our lack of investments in poor communities and rural communities is holding so many people back from reaching their God-given potential. That led me into public service. I started out as an ecumenical leader in my community, and then I served on my local school board for 6 years, and then in North Carolina Senate for 3 terms. And so for me, this is a transition into policy becoming personal and working on policy to improve the quality of life for everyone.
So you served in the North Carolina State Senate. Tell me a little bit about some of the things that you're proud of that you accomplished while you were over there.
Wow. In the North Carolina Senate, I was the only Democrat who was elected in the state Senate in 2016 and 2018 off of those racially gerrymandered maps and partisan gerrymandered maps, but who represented a 100% rural district. The 8 counties, I served 8 counties at one point, 6 counties at another point, a total of 14 different counties in North Carolina. They were all economically distressed counties. They were high rural counties, and the majority of them were high minority counties. I represented First Americans, Native Americans, Shonak Indians in eastern North Carolina, as well as Black and brown, large Black populations and Latino populations. And so I'm really excited about the intersection for me, how I was able to re-engineer policies to make them work just as well in the rural centers as they did in the urban centers. What I'm most proud of is that these counties became less economically distressed with the work that I did with the Economic Development and Global Engagement Committee that worked toward housing, worked toward tax distribution that would help so many struggling communities, particularly rural communities in Eastern and Western North Carolina. Also proud of what we were able to do for rural and advanced manufacturing, because, you know, a lot of these towns are being hollowed out by monopolies. And so understanding the dynamic of strategic infrastructure investments and how critical that is to growing economies of scale across the state of North Carolina, I'm really proud of that as well.
And then you decided at some point to run for Senate, and you came really close in the last Democratic primary. You were number 2 with 439,000 votes. Really, really close. Tell me about that run, and what do you think, if you could, you know, what did you learn from that experience, and what are you doing differently based on it?
Yes, that was an amazing run. I was outspent 15-1. And in that race, the dynamics were a little bit crazy. I announced I was running in January, but unfortunately the DS recruited a candidate out of the lieutenant governor's race to run in the North Carolina U.S. Senate race. I don't know what that was about, but it led to an epic failure. Even when they recruited this other candidate, I was leading the incumbent then, Thom Tillis, by 7 points in national polls, and that went up to 9 and as high as 13 points. And I led Thom Tillis the entire time, but unfortunately, Cal Cunningham went on to lose to Thom Tillis. But now we have an open seat, so we're building on the infrastructure and the pathway forward that we built the last time. And so I earned almost 500,000 votes, as you said, Tom, and that was being outspent 15-1. So we won that on the strength of our grassroots campaign. We are one of the only candidates for U.S. Senate in North Carolina that has traveled around to all 100 counties. We did that when we ran last cycle. We just wrapped up our 100 counties and 100 days tour. And let me tell you, so Tom, you asked me, why did I decide to run for U.S. Senate? Why did I switch? And this is something I've been working hard toward for a while. But Thom Tillis inspired me to run for the North Carolina Senate, because after being in engineering for 13 years, I transitioned and I was in K through 12 public education. I was last a curriculum specialist in 2019 and 2020. And so Thom Tillis, when he became Speaker of the House in 2009, 2011 in North Carolina, they cut 5,000 teacher assistants. They had an assault of public education. They took away teacher career tenure pay. They took away the Teacher Fellows Program, which was a recruitment program, a scholarship program that we use to grow our teachers in the teacher profession in North Carolina. North Carolina used to be a #1 top education state, but under the leadership of Thom Tillis, when he was Speaker of the House, that just devastated public education in North Carolina. And so that's what inspired me to run for state Senate in 2014. And so as a U.S. Senator, he started attacking North Carolina, particularly our rural communities. He would not attend to the constituents of North Carolina. He misused our public data through a tech breach with Cambridge Analytica. And so at that point, I decided that he needed to be challenged. I needed to run against him to offer someone for North Carolina who's going to fight hard for working people. I didn't grow up in wealth. I grew up in hard work. I grew up in poverty. I worked on my family farm, picking cucumbers, harvesting corn and soybeans. And so understanding how critical it is for making policies so that it works for working families across the nation. Our government should be one that works for all of us, not just the wealthy, not just the well-connected. And that is why I decided to run for U.S. Senate and run again, because working families need a champion in Washington, D.C., and they will have that in me.
So North Carolina is a super interesting place in that it really is flipping back and forth continuously between the Republicans and Democrats. As we can see here, Donald Trump did win North Carolina this past election just by a hair. Prior to that, he had a bigger margin over Clinton, but Romney, but then Obama won in 2008. And so this is like a classic swing state. And so, tell me more about what's going on in North Carolina. What do people care about there? Because it's not easy to kind of put it in a simple red or blue category.
Yes, and so I would say North Carolina, North Carolina is truly a purple state. By registration, if you look at our registered voters, we have about 3.4 million Democrats registered, 3.3 million unaffiliated, and then 3 million Republican. And so if you look at that dynamic among registered voters, we are clearly a purple state. Unfortunately, our congressional delegation does not look that way because of the extreme gerrymandering that has occurred in North Carolina, of which the courts have knocked down the racial gerrymanders of 2016, the partisan gerrymanders of 2018. And so we're dealing with that dynamic. But outside of dealing with the gerrymandering that has Republicans controlling the state House and the state Senate, and also the congressional delegation by 10-3, we are going through the new map making process. And so we hope that there won't be gerrymandering. But if you ask me what North Carolina looks like, you have a beautiful state with mountains on one end and the coast on the other end and all the parts in between. We have Research Triangle Park. We have a high-tech state as well as working toward top education. We have a Council of State that's about 50-50. It's part Democrat, part Republican. And when we're looking at those dynamics, we know that North Carolina can clearly flip blue. But there are three things that have to happen in this state in order for that to happen. North Carolina is a lot like Georgia. We have 100 counties, 80 of them are rural. And so we know that we have to close that rural-urban divide and look for expanding the electorate. The reason why Biden lost North Carolina, but he lost narrowly, Trump won in 2020. He also won in 2016. It is because Democrats have not done well in increasing the turnout among Black voters. Black voters was only up 4%, and that was double-digit percentages when you look across the nation at other key swing states. Also, we need to look at rural voters and bringing them off the sidelines and fighting for the issues that are important in rural America, rural North Carolina. And then the third reason is looking at a platform that is going to engage folks who are on the sideline. And we contend that people are struggling, Tom. People have suffered through this pandemic. The economy is problematic. They are working for low wages. $7.25 is $1 and $7.25 an hour is just not enough for those who are trying to put food on the table. We know healthcare is important. So I think that, we have to understand that with this crisis, we need someone offering bold solutions. People are tired of having to ration insulin just to put food on the table. And that's why we're fighting so hard for a progressive agenda and a platform that's going to work to bring folks into the process so that they know that they can have an economy that works for them.
You mentioned people are struggling and public health is one of the topics. The COVID situation in North Carolina is challenging as well. And it looks like, it kind of reflects what we're seeing in many other states in the nation, where you've got cases kind of coming back up, reaching not quite what it was in January of 2021, but pretty close, and number of hospitalizations going up each week. And certain counties have only about 20% vaccinated, like Stanley, Perquimans, Anson. What would your position be on how we can do a better job of protecting public health and beating this virus?
Well, I think as we can see, the statistics are showing that the Delta variant is decimating those who have not been vaccinated. And so we
Mhm.
know that there are high numbers, but that's mostly in the population who has not been vaccinated. You mentioned 3 counties, Perquimans, Stanley
Yeah,
County, and Anson County, where the vaccinations are down.
yeah,
And when you're looking at the effect that that has on everyone else in the community, the only way we can get our students back to school and staying in school and getting back to business is we have to get back to health first. And that's making sure that everyone gets vaccinated. And those who don't want to get vaccinated, then we're going to have to limit their interaction unless they're, willing to submit to testing. And we all need to continue to wear masks. That's the only way we can get this done. I'm really worried as a public school educator.
mm,
Children who are 12 years and under, they can't get vaccinated. So we owe it to them to keep them safe and to keep them protected. But Tom, the only way out of this is for us to increase the number of vaccinations. There have been so many incentives. We in North Carolina, we even had a lottery where your name would be put into this lottery. You could win, I think it was upwards of $1 million. And that wasn't enough to incentivize folks in certain areas. But I think that the Biden administration is on the right track in terms of requiring employers who have more than 100 employees to get vaccinated or to submit to frequent testing so that we know that we are cutting down on the spread.
yeah. It's interesting. If you sort this chart by per capita cases, you have the top counties, and it's not surprising that the number of fully vaccinated is well under 50%. As you scroll down to see where there are fewer cases per 100,000, you start to see some counties that have a higher vaccination rate, but still across the state. Let's see, where do we have the highest vaccination rate within? Looks like Martin, Orange, Dare, Wake, Durham. Oh, Durham. Yeah, that's pretty strong vaccination. And then as a result, you see less per capita hospitalizations and cases.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like we haven't been talking about this. It's not, the message is not landing. Is it what should we do differently? Because it's not getting the kind of activation that I think a lot of us were hoping when they first announced the vaccines back in January.
Yeah, Tom, I just feel that we have to start increasing the limitations on those who are not vaccinated. That is the only way to encourage vaccination. And so it is, it's a matter now of life and death for those who have not gotten vaccinated. We've shared the stories. We've shared the testimonials. I was just reading about a couple who were 40 years old and they were celebrating their anniversary and they both died and they left, I believe it was 6 or 7 children now without both of their parents. And so what we have to understand about this is it's a free country, and people want to do, I guess some of the biggest argument is that people don't want to be compelled to be vaccinated. But I'm looking at the required vaccinations that have existed for decades in this nation. In order to attend school, we had to get certain vaccinations. And so I'm just not sure what the blockages are. And the people are getting the message. They're just choosing not to be vaccinated. And if they're choosing not to be vaccinated, then they should limit their interaction so that they can prevent from spreading COVID to others. And I know that the vaccine will not prevent you from getting COVID. There are some breakthrough cases, but it will certainly keep you from suffering the more harsh consequences, even death, if you get the vaccination. What we need to do is to follow suit with the Biden administration and require employers who employ more than a set number of people to require vaccinations or require frequent testing. We're going to to have to do that within our school systems. We're going to have to do that in our public travel. And so at some point, it may, we may have to look at ways that we can address other issues like, football games, frequent events. And what we're seeing is a lot of people are not masking up, but a lot of these organizations are requiring a vaccine card just for attendance for these events. That's what it's going to take to increase the number of vaccinations and keep the community.
Yeah, it's definitely like you are already seeing some hospitals where they're back to canceling elective surgeries and preventative care because they just can't handle all the unvaccinated COVID patients pouring in and just wearing out the care teams. And these nurses and doctors are sometimes working double shifts and skipping, their meal breaks, and they're just, a lot of this is avoidable. And here we are.
And Tom, we need to protect our essential employees as well. They deserve to be protected. Every day they're risking their lives trying to save the lives of others. And in fairness to the doctors and the nurses who've had to deal with this pandemic, for a long time now, who are stressed out at work and who are, having to do some amazing things, we owe it to them to get vaccinated to keep them safe.
Yeah, well, hopefully, that's a really hot topic. And as someone running for statewide office, your kind of view that we need to take our mitigations a little more seriously is not going to land well with some parts of the state. They're going to say, hey, you're imposing on me. This is government overreach. And I have my freedom, and you can't force me to put a mask on. I should be able to go into a movie theater and do whatever I want. What would you say to people who feel really strongly about that?
I would say to them that I have COVID. I had COVID. I had COVID in January. And there are 2 weeks of my life that I won't get back. I don't know what happened during those 2 weeks. I was so sick. I was out of it. I would beg these people to take it from someone who has had COVID and understand the harsh, the harsh illness that it is to your system. And I would not want anyone to go through what I went through. There are so many people who've lost loved ones and family members, and that have not been able to come back from this. And so I would share with them that I understand that you feel that this is government overreach, but it is government's responsibility to keep the public safe. And in keeping the public safe, we're going to need you to either get a vaccine or wear your mask and socially distance. This is life or death. And while you may want to risk your life, you don't have the right to risk the lives of others. And to me, it's common sense. And you not wearing a mask and you not getting your vaccine and coming into my space, you are threatening my life. You're threatening the lives of others. So if you don't want to take the vaccine, then fine. But just don't, risk my life by not socially distancing, not wearing a mask, and not being mindful of the COVID protocols. So that's what I would share with them from the heart. There are so many people who have had COVID that did recover. Everyone says the same thing. We don't wish this on anybody else. And I don't feel that I can handle another cycle of COVID. I'm just like, it really did get to me. And I was really worried about my well-being. And so my family was worried as well. And so, Tom, it's a tough situation, but it is the government's responsibility to keep us safe. And so I would come from that perspective and that side of the conversation and beg them, as someone who survived COVID, to please don't run the risk of getting this illness. You may not make it to the other side. You may not make it through. You may not recover. You may die. And there are so many people who love you and want you to be here.
Yeah. And even if you survive, we're now just learning about the long-term, long COVID kind of symptoms that people, many of them struggle with. Many are
still struggling with COVID syndrome. COVID syndrome is real.
Yeah. And you're quote unquote lucky in that you got the classic variant of COVID. The Delta is even more intense.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
you're right. You're absolutely right.
We are going to talk a little bit about your support for universal basic income, given this channel's strong Yang Gang participation. I'm sure people will want to hear about it. Before we do that, I want to give a quick shout out to some of the folks that support this channel and kind of help out with our operating costs. So just bear with me while I just thank some of the Nerds for Humanity members. All right, so at the top of the list, we have our Senior Vice President for Nerds for Humanity, Soldier One. Thank you, Soldier One, for your great support over a long period of time. Kristen Slevin, Laura Lane, Patrick Dunn, Richard Johnson, and Bike are VPs. The next level, we have the Hardcore, Mike, Gene, David, DK, Jack Lego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Byron, Mona, Susan Yang, Tony, Robert, Dean, Stat Nerd, Galessa, Jay Perrin, AA, Jay Bryan, Vivian, Dana, Flavio, Yoda, Jason, and Parth. And then at our entry level, we have our verified nerds. Thank you for your support. V, Helen, Lisa, Sugar, Albert, Brandon, Brian, Peter, Arez, your mom, and Sophia, Jadwiga, Mike, Doris, Emerald, Lori, Ben, Roger, Lisa, Christina, Vaughn, Rasta, Jessica, Elizabeth, James, Emma, Hui, Ira, Shoni, Philip, Jameson, Dr. A, William, Karen, Monica, Mai, Ardent, Semery, David, Brittany, Sasha, Wanna, Warren, Reddy, Lucky, Kevin, and Beverly. So thank you to all of those nerds who make this channel possible. I know we're not quite as popular of a channel as we were when Andrew was running for president, but we have future leaders on the horizon, including Erica Smith. So Erica, tell me about when you first started thinking about supporting basic income, and I'm guessing it wasn't an instant yes at the time. Like, how did you come to think like, yeah, this is something I want to put on the website. I want to make it part of my campaign.
Yes, well, absolutely. I shared earlier that my master's is in religious studies from Howard University, and I did a concentration in Christian ethics, and also with a concentration in how we eradicate poverty and enhance the quality of life for Americans in this country. And so I have always been a firm advocate of Dr. Martin Luther King, and we know in his 1964 Nobel Peace Prize address, he said that there's nothing new about poverty. The only thing new is that we now have the resources to solve for poverty. And he said one of the best ways to eradicate poverty was to deal with it directly with what we know as a guaranteed basic income. So for me, it's been following the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King when he wrote his last book, The Beloved Community. Where do we go from here, chaos or community? He talked a lot about the beloved community and what that meant. And so for me, looking at the realities of what it would take to have that beloved community is when I started getting interested in universal basic income. And so thanks to the hard work of figures like Dr. King and also former presidential candidate and mayoral candidate Andrew Yang, who really revitalized this discussion when he ran for president of the United States. That's what brought me back to the understanding of UBI, but also I have supported Reverend Dr. William Barber and all of his work that he's doing around the Poor People's Campaign. And those are the ones who inspired me to include this in our platform, because for us, it's about equality that exists for the masses of people who have suffered from this generation after generation after generation.
What are your constituents say when you tell them that you're in favor of basic income or you're supportive of it? What kind of reactions are you getting?
Okay, between my 2020 run and my current run for U.S. Senate, in 2020, it was harder to talk about uniform basic income, UBI, or talk about a guaranteed income. But now, post-pandemic, when we've had the understanding of the stimulus checks, and what they meant to so many families in terms of just getting the basics that they need and not, going belly up in this crisis, this worldwide pandemic. People are having an easier understanding and acceptance of UBI. And so as we discuss what UBI is for us, our plan is $1,000 monthly recurring checks for every adult in America. And we're looking at what we're facing in this country. We're facing a racial justice crisis. We're facing an inequality crisis. We're facing a generational poverty crisis. And so we know that it's time for working families and middle-class folks to stop having to suffer just to get by. It's not the time for small ideas or incremental reforms, Tom. We have to do something bold, and we have to address this time now with substantive change. And we have found that UBI is the answer and is the response for the extreme income inequality, but it also will help folks as we try to recover from this economic crisis that we're in.
Yeah, this is a interesting article looking at income inequality in North Carolina. This is just in 2018. It's probably gotten worse, but the average annual income for the top 1% is about $900,000. For the bottom 99%, the average is $43,000. So it's a 20x difference. And the top 1% of North Carolina families collect 17% of all income. It is absolutely an issue, not just in North Carolina, but in the rest of the country.
Yes.
What are the prospects for North Carolina employment? You've got Research Triangle Parks. There's a lot of great jobs there, but that's not enough for everybody. What does everybody else do?
In Research Triangle, and those are high-tech jobs. But, in order to, that's part of the reason why I support fighting for the energy system of the future, but also we can have good paying jobs through energy jobs, clean energy jobs. And so that's also important to me. That's also what I'm fighting for. But when we look at North Carolina has two great models, Tom, for UBI and how UBI can be used. Since 1997, the Eastern Band of Cherokee, which is a state recognized and federally recognized tribe in North Carolina, they have distributed revenue from their casinos to all the tribal members with checks ranging from $500 to $1,200, $5,000 to $12,000 a year, which is really significant to the members of their tribe. So they've already implemented a variation or a version of UBI that we've seen be very successful. Also in North Carolina, we have Durham, North Carolina, which is a very progressive city. And Durham, the Bull City of Durham is what I like to call them. That's like a second home to me. It's where I went to high school. It's where I spent my time when I was in the North Carolina General Assembly because I have a twin sister who lives there. And so the Durham City Council is implementing they're close to implementing a basic income pilot program. And we've seen that to work. And also a friend of our campaign, Mayor Michael Tubbs, in Stockton, California, he had a basic income pilot program. And these programs have been so effective in dispelling the notion that guaranteed basic income makes people less likely to work or they're going to get lazy. But what it has confirmed is that people are able to pay off their debt. They're less stressed. They're able to invest in education so that they can increase their socioeconomic status. There are investments in the local economy for these folks who are spending their checks in the local economy. And so we've seen that there are very positive benefits from UBI. We've seen models that work in North Carolina. And so North Carolina is a great place to be a model of what UBI can do, also in Stockton. But we're looking for what this can do for people all over the nation.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit about your foreign policy views. Like, what would your positions be in the Senate? Let's say, obviously the Afghanistan withdrawal was a big topic of a lot of discussion. What's your view on America's role in the rest of the world?
I have a ethical foreign policy approach. I feel that we should be large supporters of diplomacy and foreign aid and supporting countries, but I do not support us entering endless wars. I am glad that President Biden withdrew troops from Afghanistan. I don't think that we have benefited well as a country when we have made decisions to enter endless wars and asserted ourselves in places across the world where we should not be. I know that there's some effort that should go into nation building and foreign diplomacy and foreign aid. But at the same time, I don't think that we can handle as a nation entering another war like Afghanistan.
Yeah, I think a lot of us would agree with you on that. It looks like you're also supportive of international minimum corporate income tax, so that countries don't compete against each other to see which corporations can park all their profit there.
Yeah, right. I think you cut out a little bit. You know what, Tom? And I'm fighting for universal broadband as well. When I relocated back home to North Carolina as an engineer, I was doing high-speed research on two flat screens. And when I moved back home to North Carolina in 2001, 2003, my parents were on dial-up internet. And it's a shame. I don't have that much stronger now. So you buffered out for a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
What you were saying, I can hear you now. What was your last statement?
Yeah, I was asking, I said, I noticed you're also supportive of a minimum corporate income tax, an international one, so that corporations are less likely to park their profits in specific countries to avoid taxation. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely, and I'm for a full tax reform. We have cut the corporate tax, and it has been to the disadvantage of so many marginalized communities across this nation. So we definitely need that tax reform, and that's one of them. We have too many companies that are parking and going offshore so that they can keep their profits and siphon it out of the economic system in America. And I think that we need to watch that more, and we need to make sure we put reforms in place. And so we have a mandatory minimum so that we can make sure that those resources are being kept in this country.
A last question I wanted to talk about before we take some audience questions. Green New Deal, climate change. I think some people, even on the right, are starting to acknowledge that the climate does seem to be changing, and we're seeing some intense weather events, whether it's the hurricanes or the floods, or on the West Coast here, we have a lot of fires and droughts. What do you think should be done about this, if anything?
Yeah, I've always been an environmental champion and a climate advocate. I got my environmental justice awareness or political consciousness as a young child. I was a middle school student at the birthplace of the environmental justice movement in Warren County, North Carolina, where they had the toxic PCB dumping. And so all of my life, I have fought for climate justice and environmental justice. I've seen the disproportionate effect and impact it has had on poor people and minority communities. And so in the North Carolina Senate, I earned every environmental award from the industry, from Rising Green Tie Award recipient, my first session by the League of Conservation Voters, to Senator of the Year, my second session, and Senator of the Year by the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, my third session in the North Carolina Senate. I'm fighting for a Green New Deal. I believe that that is the best path forward. A civilian climate corps is very important to making sure that we can address global warming. The constituents that I fight for in North Carolina along the coast, they are concerned about offshore drilling. They're concerned about sea level rise. In Western North Carolina, they're concerned about emissions and electronic pollution. We also, we deal with a number our number one industry in North Carolina is agriculture. And so we have a lot of hog farms. And with these hog farms, there are pollutions that come from when the hog lagoons are flooded by these 500-year floods in North Carolina that are coming every other year. My constituents that I served were hit and impacted gravely by Hurricane Matthew and also Hurricane Florence. And so for me, this is we have to take bold action, and the Green New Deal is what does that. We have to cut down on our carbon emissions. We need to promote green transportation. We also can create millions of good paying jobs, creating the energy system of the future, which is necessary if we're going to have a planet.
Well, one of the nerds just donated to your campaign, so thank you, Vaughn, for supporting supporting Erica. If you have questions for Erica, put them in the chat now, and I'll try and shout some of them out. One last one from me, Erica, is what would be the number one priority for you in the U.S. Senate? There are so many challenges facing us as a country. I mean, we talk about climate, income inequality, access to the ballot, public health. There's no shortage of challenges. Where would you spend most of your energy, at least in the first 100 days?
Well, in the first 100 days, I would spend my energy, I would say, getting rid of the filibuster. Because if we get rid of the filibuster, if it hasn't been rid of by then, if we get rid of the filibuster, then we can deliver on voter protections. We can pass For the People Act. We can pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We can protect access to the ballot. We can also address universal health care. We can fight. I'm fighting for Medicare for all. Everybody in, nobody out. I believe that's very critical and very important. I have my own personal story about how the healthcare system is broken and our economy is rigged. My priorities will be addressing extreme income inequality. And by doing that, I'm fighting for a whole comprehensive platform that includes universal basic income, that includes $15 minimum wage as the floor. We shouldn't go lower than that. If we were indexing it to inflation, it will be upwards of $22, $24. And I believe that a necessary component for addressing income inequality would be canceling student loan debt. So for me, it is getting rid of the filibuster so that we can deliver comprehensive protections, including reproductive health care protection for women all over this nation. That's what I will be fighting for in my first 100 days.
Yeah, that's a classic, very engineering approach. Where's the bottleneck? The bottleneck is in
where is the
ability
bottleneck
to pass legislation, right? Yeah, and the filibuster is what's really the biggest challenge right now. It's the choke point. A question from Soldier One: how do we encourage more engineers to run for government? It seems like there's a lot of people with law degrees who've been litigators, not as many problem solvers that are logic and data driven, like it seems like yourself.
Well, that's a great question. Who asked that? Was it Soldier?
Soldier One.
Thank you for that question. And so for me, engineers not only study what is, but they create that which has never been. And for me, using my engineering understanding and engineering principles and business acumen, things that I learned being an engineer for Boeing and also the United States Patent and Trademark Office, I understand the dynamic of how we can re-engineer policies, we can re-engineer criteria. When we look at the analytics and the limitations of what these policies are, and then if we do the integration, mathematically for how we can optimize these systems so that they work well. That's why I think it's critical to get critical thinkers, scientists, data analysts to run for office and to serve, because we look at the numbers. we look at the outcomes, and we're also, more empowered to look at how we can just run the iterations to make sure we can get the optimized result. We know that we have a government that's just not working unless you are wealthy or unless you're well connected. And the only way we're going to be able to change that is if we send real people who are committed to solving the problems and providing those solutions to represent us in the U.S. Senate or in the U.S. House. So I am proud to be a nerd, proud to be an engineer, but proud to be able to utilize my engineering skills to create a more just economy, a more just society. And that's what I've worked toward. I did it on the state Senate level, re-engineering many policies for economic development and global engagement, grew the economic opportunities in the part of North Carolina that I served, and I would like to do it for the entire state and the entire nation using those skills.
One of the things that is amazing is you pursued engineering for your undergrad, and it is not a common path for anyone. It is even less common for women, and then also women of color. And I was curious, what message would you send to people out there who have kids, or maybe they're in high school and they're thinking about college? The most popular profession that many youth want to do is they want to, be an entertainer, or they want to be a YouTube gamer, or an athlete. And, the reality is that many of us are not going to be any of those things. And the world kind of needs engineers, problem solvers who can use, data and evidence and trial and error and the scientific method. What message would you give to people, to the young people who are earlier in their careers, maybe just, kind of going through high school? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say to them what I tell my students now. I often share the quote by Marianne Williamson on there's this, this light and this capacity and potential within all of us. And it's our duty to allow that light to shine, but also to push ourselves beyond what we're comfortable with, to give ourselves the opportunity to explore STEM careers, looking at what can be accomplished through science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Also the arts. I also stress for my students as they're looking at careers, that if they major in something like mechanical engineering, I show them there's no limit to what they can do. If they're going to change their occupation, usually they say about 4 or 5 times. So I always encourage them to look at occupations, to look at the problems that exist in this world, and then look at the principles that you will need to know to try to solve those problems. And so I get my students engaged in, agriculture and growing and all of the science and the math that goes into being a farmer, because that's important to me as well. But also teaching them that there's no limit to what you can be. Explore math, explore science, but explore those occupations that are out there that we don't even have the majors for some of them. Looking at the Bureau of Labor and statistics that show that there are 21,000 technology jobs that we don't even have definitions for, and encouraging students that there are so many opportunities there. For me, I majored in engineering because I saw that will be an opportunity for me to be able to earn a good income, but also position myself so that I could get to a place where I could give back and rebuild society using those engineering principles. Tom, I used to pick cucumbers. We have to get up from can't see in the morning and work to can't see at night, but literally getting up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, picking cucumbers, and then you have to separate them. You don't just have to pick them, you have to separate them between 1s and 2s and 3s, because different sizes were used for different food and applications. And looking at what that taught me about hard work, about completing, endless tasks of ever increasing difficulty, that built me the capacity and the tenacity to stick to something until it is accomplished. I've always been interested in mathematics, always been interested in the sciences. Our parents made us read. We traveled a lot because my dad was in the Air Force, and we could never get into that station wagon, that town and country station wagon, the 6 of us children, unless we had a book in our hand. And so always reading books. I would encourage people to read books. I would encourage my students to read and explore the world around you, but also look at the problems. And we owe a debt. Someone said that service is the rent that you pay for being on this earth. And so in giving your service, you can do it many different ways, but there are so many available ways in science and math and STEM careers. And we need, as a matter of national security, we need more people to go into cybersecurity, go into computer engineering, also in mechanical and electrical and everything else, so that we can make sure we're building a just society, but we're creating opportunities for everyone and we're protecting the security of this country.
Erica, it feels like we could spend a lot more time talking, but we are out of time for this interview. But I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And I'm so excited for you because you came so close, almost 500,000 votes in the last primary.
Yes.
And I feel like this time around, you're going to have even more momentum and hopefully more support. So if you like what you're hearing about Erica, there are a number of things you could do. Go to her website. You could donate. You could probably volunteer. And then if you go to the Of the People site, you can vote to approve her, and then she'll be a trending candidate, and then she'll get some free promotion from OTP that way as well. So Erica, thank you again for coming on.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Of the People. And I do want to invite everyone to our UBI grassroots fundraiser. Andrew Yang is kicking it off for us, and we have so many wonderful people who are going to be participating. You can go to our website. It's Erica for Us, ERICAFORUS, ericaforus.com, or you can text 51550, text JOIN to 51550 to get this information. But our UBI fundraiser and discussion town hall will be next Saturday, September the 18th, and it's going to be at 2 o'clock, from 2 to 3 o'clock p.m. Please come out and join us, and let's fight for universal basic income. Everyone deserves a floor, and for us, that's UBI. It is a way that we can eradicate and fight against poverty in this country. Thank you for having me.
Goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye.
All right, Erica.